Thanks, everyone. We have a pretty full agenda, so we might get started. It's just gone past the top of the hour. So thank you all for joining this session on national PID strategies. And I'm Daniel Bangert. I'm Ireland's National Open Research Coordinator based at the Digital Cluster of Ireland and one of the co-chairs of this group. Thank you to those also joining online, and we'll be monitoring the chat. So Chris, do shout out if there are comments to add to the discussion. So, okay. Sorry, bear with us for a moment. Yes, okay. All right. So today's session is to look at some guidance that we've been working on to facilitate uptake and alignment of PID strategies or frameworks at the national and regional level. And this is work that commenced through the working group at the end of 2021. So we've had a couple of plenaries already, and we're nearing the end of our life cycle as a working group. So today's session will be really focused on getting your input into the draft guidance, getting your input and validation on what's been gathered so far, and also getting some updates from the community in terms of the different use cases that we've been able to gather. So we'll start by reviewing what's been done to date, and Natasha and Alice will be helping to get your feedback and comments. Then we'll hear some updates on use cases, so PID strategies in different national contexts and the state of play. And then talk a bit about what the future of this group should be as we're nearing the end. So there are notes. We'll really encourage you to take notes collaboratively, so please drop into the document and add your notes as we go. Just to reiterate, the purpose of the working group is to explore how PIDs form part of national policy and the implementation frameworks for research infrastructures more generally. Our goals are to facilitate discussion, collaboration and coordination, to see if there are points of alignment, points of similarity, points of divergences that we synthesize and bring back to the community, and create guidance for those who wish to create or develop their own national PID strategies. So it's about that policy level and bringing together the learnings from different contexts. So as I said, I'm one of the co-chairs. We have Natasha Simons in the room from ARDC. We have Chris Brown from JISC in the UK online, and Shauna Sadler is our other co-chair, ORCID. Just to point out that the RDA has a podcast, and Natasha, Shauna and Melroy might be around, yes, contributed to that. So do have a listen if you're interested in this work. So this is the main part of the session. We'll put you to work, and I'm going to hand over to Natasha and Alice to take this part.
Great. So we thought I will share, there is a link that I'll share shortly to the draft guide, but it's pretty hard to do a review of the draft guide in a session like this. So instead, we're going to first of all just look at the bigger picture through a Menti poll just to get your feedback on these questions. So Alice is going to run that part, and then I'm going to talk you through a sort of 11-point checklist for a national PID strategy that's part of the guide, and just see, if it's hitting the right notes for you or if it needs some adjustment. So let's turn to Alice first.
So you just need to get it onto the right screen. My technical abilities are a little limited. So quickly put that in first.
Sorry.
No, wait a minute. Let everybody get the codes in first.
Okay.
And then we'll.
Alice will have to read it out too.
Okay, so oh yes. For those of you who can't see the code, you go to menti.com and the code is 7 8757801. Sorry to those of you online, we're having tested this before and it worked, and it's now not behaving so well.
I can try and find some help. Is there a way you can proceed after I do?
I could probably log in and just read them out. Are you need my computer? Have you got yours there?
I can log in on my laptop. Yeah. If has everybody managed to get in and is able to type your answers?
Yeah.
Okay, in that case, give me a minute, I'll run my laptop and I'll tell you what everybody's saying. Now, of course, my laptop is also not, doesn't like the internet for some reason.
While we we can also skip forward to the use case if we want to. So come back here. Yeah. Yes. Can we skip forward just to the use cases? Working. Sorry. Yep. Okay, so we will come back. We'll come back to the working part of the session. You don't have to work that quickly after afternoon tea, it turns out. So we've got a series of use cases. So we asked people to come up and talk. And John, you're up first.
All right, so I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces from Data Sites meetings, so I'm going to try to say a few things that are different, but I am going to start with the exact same context slide. So, well, first of all, I'm John. I work at the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, and I'm the manager of the Canadian PID community. And at CRKN, we manage two PID consortia, the ORCID Canada Consortium, which we've had for 6 years now, and the DataCite Canada Consortium, which we've only had for a couple of years, although it's existed since 2012, run by other agencies. And the way that our broader PID program and conversations around a PID national strategy came together was, again, relatively organically, because we were running the ORCID Consortium. When the existing DataCite Consortium in Canada required new management, new administration. They came to us because we were already doing PID things, and we wound up co-managing it and with another organization called the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. Their logo is just at the bottom there. And working with the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, which is a relatively new organization that supports digital research infrastructure in Canada. They do a lot more than just PIDs. They provided some funds to offset member fees in DataCite Canada. And after a year of that, we realized, why don't we try to get funds for ORCID too? That might also be very useful for the PID community to help more organizations join, grow that community, grow the amount of access and equity in these communities. And that came through. And since 2021 now, every year we've had some significant centralized funding for both DataCite Canada and ORCID CA through the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. The other thing that happened when we took over DataCite Canada was that we already had a fairly robust governance structure for ORCID CA, which included a governing committee made up of member institutions and then an advisory committee made up of relatively high-level individuals from institutions that were not members. So these were our funders, our library consortia, our research and infrastructure organizations, and a few others here and there. So when we took over DataCite, we didn't want to create an entirely separate parallel governance structure. Again, we thought, why don't we just combine these things? So there is a separate DataCite Canada Governing Committee, again, made up of DataCite Canada members, but then the ORCID Advisory Committee became the Canadian Persistent Identifier Advisory Committee. It provides advice to both governing committees of both consortia, but more importantly, this is where the development of a strategy comes in. We want to look beyond the existing consortia to better understand the PID landscape in Canada and to really start to think about doing more than just supporting these two specific communities. So the CPDAC exists to provide that advice, and the funding for this, and in particular for hiring some consultants from More Brains, again comes from the Digital Research Alliance of Canada. So I've been asked to reflect a little bit on, oh, that didn't work out in the PDF version, sorry about that. I've been asked to reflect a little bit on why would a national strategy specifically be useful? And some of this speaks to the specific context in Canada, trying to understand the way that these different communities of practice have emerged organically around the consortia. Not to say that work didn't go into developing them and building them. Of course, ORCID CA took a lot of work to set up 6 years ago. Taking over the DataCite Canada Consortium was a little less difficult. There was an existing community and it's just been growing ever since. But beyond that question of sort of organic growth, why would a national strategy as opposed to an international approach be particularly useful? And I think there are three main reasons, and I highlight them there. It's resources, it's communities of practice, and it's policy. Resources, at least the way that we work in Canada, are directly tied to typically our federal government, and it's really hard to get projects off the ground internationally without a significant amount of work. And I mean, everyone here knows that. RDA is fantastic. But in order to really implement in specific institutions, we needed our government involved, we needed our institutions involved, and we had to start with who is going to fund this. And again, somewhat organically, somewhat luckily, the Alliance came into the picture and started helping us with DataCite Canada, and so we were able to get that funding through them. In terms of community, I'm always talking about this, so you've probably already, if you've heard me speak, you've heard me say this, but the communities of practice that exist in the context of the ORCID and DataCite consortial model have been integral to making anything happen in Canada. We have a great community of practice who knows what PIDs are, how they work, understand the value proposition, understand why integrating PID APIs is important, and these member institutions, or I should say the representatives from the member institutions, become great champions for PIDs writ large. And these communities of practice would not have existed without the specific membership they have in their local regional consortium. And while this, I'm sure this is a concern for lots of folks around the room, but in Canada, we have bilingual policies, a bilingual country, and we have to provide services, not just in English, but in French simultaneously. And there's a political dimension to that some of the time. And if we can't do that in our own way, we're not going to be able to move forward. And that's sort of where the policy component comes in. The federal government at the moment in Canada has released a roadmap for open science. And this roadmap is something that explicitly calls out the FAIR principles and asks that each of the science-based departments and agencies within the federal government develop an action plan to implement open science, whatever that means. And many of them very explicitly talk about PIDs, and some of them even more explicitly talk about ORCID, DataCite, DOIs, ROAR, and other PIDs. So there's a really helpful, again, opportunity, this connection, the organic growth of these concerns in Canada that enables us to basically say, well, if we're doing open science and your government departments are in the middle of developing open science action plans, we need to be engaging with PIDs really seriously, not just ORCID, not just DataCite, but think about the holistic approach. So I'm going to end there, other than just to say that we've been working really closely with More Brains over the last year to develop a number of reports and ultimately to develop a full strategy, and that work is ongoing. So I won't have anything more to share about that at this stage, but very happy to talk about this after if anyone has any questions.
Thank you.
Hi, Daniel. So can you hear me?
Go ahead.
You're not showing the slides online. I did share a link with the online participants so they could see the slides, but we just seen the room.
Yeah, we seem to be. We'll try and fix that. Sorry.
That's great. Thanks.
All right, next we have Alice to talk about the work that More Brains is doing. Go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks, John, for a nice segue, nice setup there. I'm Alice Meadows from More Brains. As John mentions, we've done some work with them and also with Australia and with the UK on developing their national PID strategy. So I was just going to say a few words about, since we're like a little microcosm of the bigger work that's being done by the RDA working group, about some of the things that we've found as they're doing this work with these three quite different countries in some ways, but with similarities as well. So first of all, some things that everybody's approaches have in common. And I think I've put first broad and deep stakeholder engagement and involvement because I really think that is the key to success with this. I think none of these initiatives are going to succeed if we don't really engage with the community, and that's all stakeholders. So it includes, for example, vendors as well as institutions. It includes large and small institutions. It includes, researchers and librarians. We really need to be as broad and as deep as we possibly can as we build out these national strategies. I think all three countries also had existing robust PID consortia. I think that was a real help actually for all of them as well. There was leadership by national organisations, which I think helped give the projects, give the initiatives some real sort of gravitas and push. And there was a government level commitment, at least to some extent, in all countries to open and fair research. So I think that really helped as well. In Australia and the UK, we were also able to demonstrate financial benefit. We haven't talked about this yet in Canada, but it may be something that at least in some way I think will be addressed. So that helps, again, particularly from the sort of funding side. Government and funders like to know that there's going to be a financial benefit, or at least an understanding of what the cost benefits are. Another really important thing, I think, is this sort of commitment to equitable access and to equity within the country. So again, this isn't something that's just for the big institutions. It's not something that's just for universities. It's something that's intended to have a benefit and to be equitable across all the whole country. And then again, another thing that came out of all of these, they weren't the same in every case, but every country has started to identify or has identified a core set of persistent identifiers that they feel should always be used among the community. But there are also some reasons for different national approaches, and John, you sort of alluded to this, and one question that quite often comes up is just, well, why do we need a national approach? That's sort of, research is global, research is international, you shouldn't be taking a national approach to it. And John, you set out some of the reasons, I think, in Canada why a national approach is needed. And across all three countries that we worked with, first of all, there are different approaches to funding nationally, and that needs to be taken into account. There are specific needs, for example, bilingualism in Canada that John noted, and there's definitely a sense in Canada that, or there has been a sense that, the Anglophone world is kind of leading and the Francophone world is can sometimes perceive itself as being a little second best. So we really, really, really need to make sure that that isn't the case, that both communities feel equally well represented and well served. I think the national research exercises that exist in Australia and the UK have been really critical in terms of helping drive some of this work. And Natasha, you talked a bit about this yesterday, I expect you'll say a bit more today about how work that's being done to create a national PID strategy. The hope and belief is that it will really help improve those national research exercises, which are currently seen as a bit of a nasty, horrible process to go through. And then there are some other specific needs like in Australia and Canada, meeting the needs of Indigenous researchers and Indigenous knowledge. And then I wanted to close with just some of the benefits. This is not an exhaustive list, but just in terms of, what is the prize? Where are we trying to get to? And there are definitely some significant cost savings, both in terms of finances and also researcher time. I think in the UK, we showed that there would be about 55,000 researcher hours a year saved, and in Australia it was about 38,000. That translates into quite a lot of money, but it also translates into a lot more time for researchers to spend actually doing research, and also, and this is a sort of, you can't really measure it necessarily, but much less frustration for researchers. I think we all know that researchers find it incredibly frustrating to be asked to do the same task again and again and again, and saving them some of that time doesn't just save them the time, but it also helps sort of reduce some of that frustration that they feel. Of course, PID strategy, we all believe, will also drive and support the move to open research. So, PIDs on their own aren't going to do that, but they are a very important component of the move to open research. Again, this idea of bringing the community together, which I think is critical to success, but it's also a benefit in itself. This ability to find common cause, I think, is really, really important benefit that maybe is often overlooked as part of this process by some people. And then, again, somewhat repeating myself, the fact that it supports a more equitable national research ecosystem where everybody, we hope, has a voice, is being served properly. It's not sort of the haves and have-nots, it's something that everybody can share and benefit from. And then I think the slides are going to be shared, so there are links through to the actual reports here, but these are the main reports that we've produced so far. There's a bunch more if anybody's interested. They're quite lengthy reading, some of them, so be prepared. The website is at the bottom there, and say everything that we can make openly available, we have done in our repository. So I strongly encourage you to check it out if you can.
Thanks. We also wanted to highlight some PID providers. So I think we have DataCite first.
Well, Natasha just found me yesterday and told me to say a couple of words, so I didn't come prepared with slides. That word wasn't mentioned at all when you asked me to give a talk today. But yeah, no, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to have a chance to be part of this session because obviously it's a super important topic. I'm Helena, I work for DataCite, where I'm the Director of Community Engagement. I think probably many of you are already somewhat aware of what we do, but we're a global membership organization. We have members in around 50 countries now, and members join us to collectively have the ability to register persistent identifiers for a wide range of research outputs. And the way in which this works is that it's possible to join as a direct member, so just for the organization, but in many countries we actually have consortia. And so John provided a really great example of a consortium in Canada. And I really see these as playing a key role in a way, sort of in between us and the national PID strategies, because I think this is really how we also learn about what's happening in the countries, but also how we can provide input. And I thought it was really interesting that you mentioned about sort of disallowing also for more of a bottom-up approach, because you can see with the consortia that organizations join because they have an interest in using persistent identifiers, and that way a country can also see, hey, actually, this is an important thing. This is something researchers and research organizations are thinking about. And that way governments and other stakeholders in countries start thinking about this, which then again sort of feeds back and also shows other organizations, this is something, we should be considering. And I think that dynamic is something that's really crucial. And that's also really how I see sort of the collaboration between the infrastructure providers such as DataSite and the communities is that we as infrastructure provider can provide some insight into how persistent identifiers are currently being used. And we obviously get many use cases from the community that we can share that are relevant to the development of national PID strategies. And on the other hand, it's super useful for us to now learn from all the use cases that are being collected as part of the national PID strategies and know how we should be contributing to addressing those. So yeah, I didn't bring a list of use cases that we're aware of, but I think definitely something, you know, that we can do. And also I think for specific countries where we can look at the information we have. And yeah, it's just a really exciting challenge to address collectively. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity, and please come find me if there's anything you already like to discuss today.
Elena, and we have Orchid as well. I'm not sure who's speaking, Chris.
That's me, yeah.
Great.
Shuffle along here. Well, hi everybody. Great to be here. Like Elena, no slides. I just tried out this yesterday. First of all, just to kind of echo what everybody else has said, that John talked about, Alice talked about, Helena talked about. Maybe if I think about things from the Orchid perspective, I can kind of connect a set of dots. Because fundamentally what we're trying to do at Orchid is help researchers. Right? We're trying to help them earn credit for their work. We're trying to help them increase visibility. Importantly, we're trying to help them reduce time on admin tasks and spend more time doing research. And what we found, and there was a study that Simon Porter from Digital Science published, I think in 2021, but there's a correlation between well, first of all, there's a difference. What his study tells us, there's a difference between the levels of engagement in Orchid among researchers in different countries. Now, what we did is kind of informally overlaid our membership on top of that. And we can definitely see that where we have more organizational members, there's more researcher participation. So we know that organizational membership from universities, from funders, in countries, from policymakers, encourages research participation. And in turn, we know that where we have national consortia that are active, we have more organizational membership. So our primary membership model, we have around 1,300 members. About 900 of those joined through national consortia. We have 26 consortia right now. So we connect the dots so far. Consortia in countries drives organizational membership, drives research participation. And we've also seen that some of our most active and most successful consortia are those where they are engaged in strategic conversations about the strategy for research and connecting the value of PIDs in countries. So Australia is probably the best example of that, UK, Canada. So I think that's the value for us, that getting that, the value of PIDs is in a network effect, right? As many as possible people agreeing to use the same set of identifiers and metadata. And that requires kind of buy-in and coordination among a lot of different stakeholder groups in a country. And this kind of convening of a national PID strategy helps to really drive that conversation and identify those killer use cases. So the use case of the integration of Orchid into the main funding application process in Australia, the ARC process, really helps demonstrate the value of Orchid to everybody in Australia. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that connects dots. And again, I'm around for the rest of the conference, so come and ask me about Orchid if you'd like. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chris. We've got Gul now from the Netherlands to talk about the work there. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Gul. I am a project manager for open research information at SURF. And for those who don't know SURF, we are a collaborative organization in the Netherlands for IT and higher education and research. And for us, it started in the Netherlands in 2005 already, where we had the need to develop a digital author identifier. And fast forward, ORCID came in the picture, and we had two identifiers for authors and the researchers, and then over time the ORCID consortium grew, and in 2020 we made it an official service, so we are also leading the ORCID consortium in the Netherlands. And now we are, we have 18 consortium members. But of course, this is a nice example of where we have basically two identifiers that in identifying a researcher. So that also raised that Netherlands the question like, okay, when are we using now which identifier? And I'm gonna skip this because I think everyone before me made it clear why we are having a national PID strategy. And basically, the work by Australia, UK, basically inspired us in the Netherlands to think about, okay, where is it going, and then what do we want, and when are we using what? Some people fell off the list here, or organizations. We started with a small group of people with NWO, DANS, the libraries, and CWTS to think about, okay, where is it going? What do we want? What is the importance of having persistent identifiers? And at some point we had the advisory board who thought about an assignment, and we created a working group of all the other organizations and then PID lovers to think about where is it going? What is our vision? What is the current situation? And how do we get to where we want to be? But then some challenges that we had is that, well, I'm going to start with the picture. We had the advisory board who was giving the assignment to a working group. And then we had a situation where the working group was also looking at the advisory board to tell them what was expected, and then the other way around. So we had an interesting situation there. But we managed, we developed something. We developed a year ago now, a document called Towards a National PID Strategy, where we defined 9 recommendations on a national level, of which we thought, hey, this makes sense. One of the examples is, pay attention to the uptake and update of ORCID profiles, because people are creating one, but is it up to date? And all the researchers already have an ORCID? And that was also something that libraries and universities paid attention to. But then lockdowns, pandemic, so the campaigns didn't go through. So there's still some challenges there to look at. So we made it an obvious recommendation to look at that, and as well, because of the fact that NWO as the main research funder had also a PID strategy where they recommended ORCID. So it made sense to do something with ORCIDs at least. But that's just one example. Then after delivering the recommendations, we had the challenge of mandate. So who is now responsible for what? So recommendations are just recommendations. So it's not that we are making it mandatory to an organization or a person or whoever to do something with it. And last but not least, the international alignment, because we made these recommendations on a national level, but then at some point we had the question, so how does this relate to the developments on an international level? Because if you would look at RDA working groups, now all the outputs that are out there, or other initiatives, are we talking about the same things? Are these slightly different recommendations that we are making here? So that was an interesting observation. And then I think it's clear that it's also learning by doing how we are approaching this, because we don't have this checklist or a template yet of how to approach a national pitch strategy. But some essentials that I would like to share is that we started with use cases. So instead of looking at the pits and the value of a certain pit, we started really with the use cases. So when does a pit have a value, and then looked at what can we pitify already? So what are the entities, and which are then the identifiers that we could use? And kept it really open, and did not make any, didn't really show any preference except for a couple of obvious identifiers. Another essential part is the benefits for researchers and data stewards. So what's in it for them? Because we were talking with a group of people, with most of the stakeholders, and then the question was still, we are talking about this, but the researchers eventually have to do something with their identifiers, and they need to see the point in having identifiers in order to have those identifiers and make it work. Any other essential part, which was also mentioned before, include as many stakeholders as possible. Have an open dialogue with all the stakeholders. So all of our meetings, we invite everyone and try to communicate it across all the channels that we have, to basically invite everyone, as I mentioned, the pit lovers, to talk with us about their experience and what works for them or what doesn't work for them, because we also know that there are other initiatives on a national level when it comes to persistent identifiers, for example, the National Archive, who was not involved in the beginning. But it's interesting to, keep an eye on those stakeholders. So this is the document I was talking about. I think you can just find this on Zenodo if you're interested. But basically, as I mentioned, we had a couple of use cases, and in this document we worked on 2 use cases to make it, at least to have a starting point about what are we talking about when we say registering and reporting research output, or when we're talking about reusability and reproducibility of research output. And the other 4 use cases were also the things we identified, and now we are looking at what are we going to do with the recommendations, and then can we make them into project plans maybe on a national level, and what are we going to do, or when are we going to work on the other use cases, because also one of the other challenges I didn't mention is that everyone is working on a voluntary base, so that also makes you very dependent on the availability of all those resources. But an interesting development on a national level is that we are now also talking and working on an open research information agenda. Well, that didn't really work out when I made the import in Google. But this agenda has 3 pillars. So it's all about agreements, data quality, and pilots. So agreements is a very nice hook for this PID approach that we are having, because what I've also seen in the working group is that as soon as they heard about this agenda, they were like, does it make sense for us to come together and talk about all these things? Well, the agenda has a formal governance structure, and shouldn't we wait and look at how that develops before we make even recommendations? So an idea, and then the puzzle that we are now making is basically to make the working group an essential part of the agreements, because this agenda is also the agenda where the same stakeholders are involved in. So putting all the pieces together and converging stuff and then align more with the existing national programs makes sense. And hopefully that also gives the working group a a more empowered feeling, and then actually, you know, it's not just recommendations, but we can really make national agreements out of the work that we are all putting energy and effort in. So that's about this.
Thank you, Gul. Invite Natasha back to talk about ongoing work in Australia, and then Jessica about the EOSC landscape.
And then we'll ask if anyone here would like to give an update as well, that is not scheduled. So I think a lot of you have seen these slides, everyone who was at the data site one, so I might just skip, I think you know our motivations for having a national PID strategy, which is that, you know, data-driven stuff going forward in the future. I sort of am still amazed by this figure. By 2025, the volume of data created in that year will be 4 times the amount of existence in 2020. That's really hard to conceptualize, actually, but the whole machine readability thing, you can just see it just speaks for itself. And the whole report that More Brains did that showed the savings that can be made from investment in PIDs, 38,000 person days per year and 24 million Australian dollars. And if you actually have that as an opportunity cost, then it goes up to 84 million. So these are really big, impressive figures. And the recommendation there was to develop a national PID strategy for Australia. So I'm here to just give an update on where we're at with that. So we really kicked this off in January, and Linda O'Brien is our consultant that we hired to ARDC to lead that work with us. So Linda is the former chair of the International Orchid Board, and she was also instrumental in setting up the Australian Orchid Consortium with myself and other people, and the consortium that's now run by Melroy, who's here from AF. And so she's sort of a fantastic person to be leading this, because her former position was Pro Vice Chancellor at a university, which is a wonderful title when you're actually looking to get in at that senior level. So we've set up a National PID Strategy Task Force. It's a very impressive term, I think. Task force. It's our task force. It's going to do stuff. So stuff that it's doing is over the next few months. It is so we also have the head of the CEO of the Australian Research Council on that, which also shows their commitment to this kind of a program. And there's some other senior people there from government and elsewhere, because I think one of our challenges in this PID strategy is, you know, we're focused on research, and the ARDC specifically is funded for research and data, but we're sort of bleeding into government fairly significantly. And where does government data stop and start? Like, researchers use it. So, you know, is it our role to PIDify government stuff? And they certainly want a sort of government strategy. So maybe that will come through in this a little bit more, but it is a tricky kind of area, actually. And often when they talk about PIDs, they're actually just talking about linked data, which is a different type of thing to, you know, your ORCIDs and DOIs. So it's an interesting conversation to be having. So we had a national workshop a couple of weeks ago in Canberra. That was open to anyone who wanted to come, but the really keynote speakers there from government and from universities, you know, we had Deputy Vice Chancellor Research, we had Head of Government Department, all sort of saying this stuff's really important. And then we sort of did some visioning for where we want to be. And then out of that, we've now got an open call for working group members to come in and just be part of it. So we'll see how many we get for each group, but one of them, for example, is going to be on grants. So we do have identifiers for research grants. So the ARDC issues PEARLs, which is a different type of identifier again, for the grants from ARC and NHMRC, and we've tried for 4 million years to get them to transfer to DOIs, but we haven't got there yet. So we hope that this grant strategy will help them transition into something new there, and that it will raise other things, because these are all problem-focused things. So how can we better identify research grants in Australia, which may lead to conversations around the Discovery Portal, because we have one, but it doesn't include things like Medical Research Foundation grants and things like that. So, you know, these are going to open, they're a little bit can of wormsy. Some of them will open up all kinds of discussions. We have one on national, non-traditional research outputs, so sort of creative arts stuff. We have another one on government that is specifically for the government strategy people. So, and we'll have to see how these all tie in. Another one is actually on the government reporting exercise and how it can contribute there. So we will have a period where people can make either individual or working group submissions. We've worked up a template which makes it easy for us when we get the submissions to handle them, because otherwise we'll get all sorts of stuff. And we're going to accept those between April and June, and then produce a draft strategy and accompanying roadmap document. The most important bit is identify a responsible organisational body to lead implementation of roadmap. And then we socialise that strategy, get some insights and further buy-in, and have some iterative drafts as required. So this is a similar approach we took to the Australian Orchid Consortium, which was that we got all the stakeholders in the room. We all agreed we had a common problem. We couldn't identify researchers and link them to their works. And we had Laurie in the room there, who's then Executive Director of Orchid, and everyone went, oh, well, this Orchid thing seems like a good solution. And we said to the funders, could you mandate Orchid then, please? This was back in 2014. And they said, no, we don't mandate things. And even if we did, you are not ready. And everyone went, oh, yeah. So we went out and set up the Orchid Consortium to get people ready. And when we floated the model for the consortium, we had an iterative thing. So we said, here's the model, what do people think? And we adjusted it as feedback went in until we got it right. We asked for expressions of interest. We got 20 universities, there's 42 in Australia. We thought if we get 20, sweet, that's good. And actually we got 40 members straight off. So that was really fantastic, who signed up on the line to the consortium. So we're sort of hoping to recreate a bit of that magic for this national PID strategy and then drive the roadmap forward. So to me, the most important part is that conversation. And I think I said this yesterday, that you can tell people what to do and they will not do it. And you can give people money to do something and they will do it as long as the money's there. But if you get everyone in a room and they agree that that actually have a problem and that this thing can actually help them solve it, then you've really got something and people start actually using it, because it's not just about having PIDs, it's about putting them to use and getting that value out of them. So that's where we're at with our strategy. And now it's over to Jessica.
So this time I won't be talking about Finland. I wanted to say some words about the PID landscape in EOSC, because there's a lot of interesting things going on. So this is my take. First, since a couple of years, we have the EOSC PID policy, which if you haven't read, I recommend you look at. It's a quite high-level document, and I think it's especially useful because there's there are really good definitions about the different like roles and actors that are around. The landscape is quite complex, so this is really good to have these definitions to work with. And then there is also a EOSC PID architecture, but that's more technical, much more detailed, and it's not really completely coherent, I think, or well aligned with the policy. There's some differences in the terminology, I think so. But it's also very interesting, and there are good things to look at. So in the EOSC Association now, there is also a task force, of course, for PID policy and implementation. So there are really a group of experts who are working with the developing and implementing these things and helping the discussion forward here. And then we also have 2 projects now working closely with the EOSC core. And the first one I would like to mention is Fair Core for EOSC, where we actually there are 9 different services built
And there are at least 4 of them that are closely related to PIDs. There are a couple of graphs, and then there's a PID meta resolver, and then also there's a great implementation coming up. Then FECO for EOSC also has a sister project, which is not so much technical, but more to the soft side. And it has a work package that's working with PIDs. And so we are setting up a coordination mechanism for the EOSC service providers. And then we are working with different kinds of emerging PIDs and real like research use cases. And then there's a task working with a PID policy, and then there's a PID implementation program. There will be like also in this project some open calls for support. So now especially this task 3.3 is maybe interesting here, and we have been looking at the PID policy and also discussing what kinds of things you would need to look at or discuss in your PID policy if you are a service provider, if you are a PID manager, owner or something. This is still work in process. So, but I think that will be hopefully interesting and useful also, because there are of course different things for different, I mean, organizations need policies also, and infrastructures need policies, and they look a bit different, and they might be also different depending on which PID systems you use. So you might have different roles with different PIDs. So, but we are also looking for good examples for PID policies. So if you have any examples, so please submit them. You can fetch the QR code or go via that link. So, but that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. We're going to reattempt, I think, the interactive part of this session. So maybe as that's getting set up, we did have a spot for spontaneous updates from anyone here who wants to talk about PID developments in their national context or regional context, just to add to what we've heard already in the session. Are there any volunteers? Feel free to speak up. Yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah, maybe from here. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Sheila Raven. I am the program leader for persistent identifier communities at an organization called Lyrasis, which is in the United States.
Actually, Sheila, sorry, I remember there's a camera for the online people.
So I should go.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, my organization Lyrasis is it started as a consortium for libraries mostly in the United States, but has kind of grown and evolved. So if you're familiar with software like DSpace or Fedora or ArchiveSpace, anything like that, we're kind of the organizational home for those. And we're also the organizational home for the United States ORCID Consortium. And 2 years ago, we started a data site consortium for US nonprofit organizations as well. So in the United States, it's very large. There are a lot of organizations, and the federal government is very decentralized, and the culture is very much, like freedom, like everybody kind of do what you want to do. So the federal government has many different agencies. So like the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, National Endowment for the Humanities. So different agencies all get to decide their own policies for how they're going to give out grant funding. But we have had some exciting developments within the last couple of years, where the White House basically told all of the agencies that they have to come up with a policy about individuals having a digital persistent identifier And then they list all of these, like, what that identifier has to meet, like the criteria. And it's basically ORCID, but they're not just coming out and saying ORCID. But each agency gets to decide if they want ORCID to be required or optional. So everyone's not necessarily on the same page, and we're still waiting for all of the agencies to release their policies. So things are kind of up in the air right now, but it's like moving in that direction a little bit. And also just this year, the White House also released a memo about public access. So any research that comes from a federal grant has to be, the output has to be made available to the public. And in that document, they talk about basically DOIs or having some sort of identifier for the output. And so this is kind of the first time that the federal government has really come out and started talking about persistent identifiers. So more organizations are starting to pay attention. Our ORCID consortium almost has 200 organizations, and it just keeps growing. So there are a lot of good signs, but a big challenge is it's hard to get all of the stakeholders in one room to have a conversation to say, this is our official national strategy. There are kind of different groups talking about it, and we're all kind of watching what the federal government is doing, but I don't know what qualifies as a national PID strategy. So I guess we have a strategy, but it's not super formalized, and we haven't had these like discussions or task forces across the entire country because it's just so large. And yeah, but things are moving in a good direction. So just wanted to give that update. Thanks.
We still can't get it up on the, I don't think, but I do have results from the first poll for those of you who participated, and interestingly, it's very, very overwhelmingly, I would say half or more of you who responded said a version of the same thing, which is about getting everybody on the same page, everybody using the same, standards, coordinated effort, coordination across sectors, that kind of thing came across very, very strongly. So that's clearly seen as a big benefit. There are a couple of others. Achieving fair principles was one, improved efficiency was one, incentivising researchers to use PIDs came up a couple of times as well. But really the sort of getting everybody on the same page, moving in the same direction seems to be the one that at least the people in this room who responded see as the biggest value to having a national PID strategy. So does everybody still have the Menti open and the code open? If so, I can move to the next question, which you can't see on the screen, I'm afraid, but which is how can international PID providers engage with national PID strategies? And I can see that some of you have already answered, but I'll give the rest of you a minute or two to add your thoughts. And I think we can probably share the results afterwards with people. So apologies for the technical glitches.
Do we have any experts in the room that want to try?
What's the issue that you're having?
I actually don't know which screen this is presenting, and I can't shut it down, so I can show you the Menti slides instead.
We did honestly test it beforehand, and everything was looking great.
And I tried to choose the Menti screen on Google or Chrome, but it's only visible here, but not here. Hello.
Hi.
Magical person.
No. What is it? Is that point or is it?
Så kommer här, men hur får jag ner den där?
Ja, men det här är bakgrunden bara. Det är bara bakgrunden.
Ja, nu gör jag för att visa.
Will we do it with PowerPoint and
Jag vill
PDF?
visa en sån,
Ja, men vad är det för någonting?
en webbsida.
En webbsida? Okej.
In the meantime, I can tell you some results of the second answer. And again, there is a fair bit of consensus around this. There's quite a lot around communication, facilitating discussion, sharing use cases, sharing experiences, sort of being the PID organisations can be the people, the organisations that help kind of coordinate.
So it's window D, then you can, it's duplicate when you're not doing PowerPoint. You need to go to duplicate, same for PDF.
Now you can actually see the answers. Okay. Yeah, so lots around communication best practices, I say.
Just all answers, Alex.
Also using a laptop that you're not familiar with is also, I'm not the best at it, obviously. So yeah, very kind of common approach, use cases again, providing customer support models, so lots around communication, coordination, consultation, be those kind of organising bodies, I think is the big theme that comes across here for PID providers. How to get to the next one, please the rest of you go to the next one. I'm not trying to do the same.
Into the other arrow.
Right.
The forward arrow. Yeah.
How can this ideate a working group be of value to you? Well, this session will be memorable for the technical teachers and nothing else. Hopefully for some of the discussion as well.
I think you have to press enter to share.
Yeah, I was just waiting to see what people. I think there's going to be. It's quite surprising actually. Usually when we do Mentees, there's a less consistency in the answers, but this is actually very helpful to see that there's such a clear message coming through from you all about the kind of things, the kind of ways we can help. So engagement, exchange, knowledge exchange, support, documenting use cases, sharing experiences. It really is, I think, there's some very clear guidance here coming from all of you about what you want from this group and what you think the value of the national PIDs are.
That's great. Good.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for.
Access the slides then.
Okay, we're going to try and switch back to the slides now.
Well, actually, yeah, if we can not do that for me. We can actually go. Yeah, but if we can actually go to the, because there's a link in there I want to use. I'll let you do it. So one of the tasks of this working group, so the RDA, when we set up the working group, we had quite a lot of ambition actually, but it hasn't really been matched with in reality where people are at with their national PID strategies. So there was a goal there which REA encouraged us to take on, which was to create a blueprint for national PID strategies. And that's actually a sort of how-to guide. And that's actually too hard to do because no one's actually done it. That's one thing. And we're all at different stages. And like was said earlier in the presentations, I think we all feel like we have PID approaches, not necessarily strategies in place. And there's no single kind of way to do this, but there are some common elements and there are some divergences that are worth noting as well. So we've just created a guidance document that will, we've collected 9 use cases, so from 9 different countries. And I think we have more to collect because at the data site meeting yesterday, our friends from Czech Republic presented and also from Germany, and we don't have either of those case studies. And we are promised one from the US, but I don't know where we will get to for that. And so these are really just, the other tricky bit is that they're fantastic use cases, but they're all point in time. And you can see, for example, with the Australian strategy, we submitted ours last year. Now it's completely not current anymore. So we have to submit an updated version. You're the same in Canada, John, like it's just, and same with Gaul in the Netherlands. It's just a constantly changing environment. And I guess that's why we all want to talk about it, because it's in flux and lots of things are changing and we want to learn from each other. So what we're going to do with the guidance document is compare and contrast the different case studies and pull out these are the common elements and these are the divergent parts of it. And it's kind of, there's some common drivers, but there's some really unique drivers in there as well. And that's kind of worth noting that's why these are national strategies, because they actually have unique national drivers. They're not all the same kind of drivers behind these strategies. And there are some similar PIDs there, like ORCID and DOI, but then there's this really long tail of very different identifier types that we're all looking at. And I think that's absolutely fine. You know, this isn't about making a judgment of that. This is an observation that we have some divergences in national approaches, but we also have some common things there. And definitely having the consortia, I think, is definitely a strength as well. So what I have done is create a appendix that lists, it's like an 11-point guide to, I don't know if we, sick watching that. Can you go back to that? Yeah, so there is, anyway, I was really wanting some feedback. There's no table to put my thing on and see that. But if you could go to that tiny URL, that it would be really good just to get a little bit, so we've only got 20 minutes left. So if I could just spend like 10 minutes on this, just to get your input on the checklist and just see if you think it's right or not, because we're all doing this in different ways. And it might not be, you know, exactly right, you know, but it's sort of reflecting what people are doing now. So I'll just read it out anyway. So the first one, so the idea of this checklist is not sort of do 1 to 10 in order and do all of them and you will have a magical unicorn PID strategy. You know, it is actually just, have you considered these aspects? Okay, and you just pick and choose, you know, and you might have things that are not on there, and that's what I'm asking here. Is there anything else that you'd like to be included? Is the wording right? You know, do you have examples? Because I'll fill out the examples column, you know, with my co-chairs as well, Daniel and Chris and Sean will help with that as well, because we've all been working on the guide together. So the first one on the checklist is, have you established a clear value proposition for developing a national PID strategy? Now, some of the value propositions done by More Brains have focused on the big numbers, you know, the big dollar signs, because that's what talks, but actually there are other values to PIDs, as we all know, you know, in accuracy of reporting, in tracking impacts, in linking research outputs and things like that. So it's just kind of worded as a value proposition, not necessarily a monetary one there. And the tip there is to consider the common problem you're trying to solve and how PIDs can solve it. So that's, other people were framing that as use cases. What is the use case? So so that's the first one. First of all, does anyone object to that? Does anyone want to change anything about that? Now's your chance to. Yeah,
just where you pause there, we can't see the slide again. It's just a blank screen. when you share the room. So if I don't know if the list is on the screen or not.
Chris, just go to the checklist. It's not on the
Haven't got
screen.
Okay, share the URL in the chat.
We haven't got the URL for it.
Okay, we can put that in chat.
It's, yeah,
Thanks.
sorry, Chris.
I would encourage you to actually specifically mention use cases here,
Okay,
because I think there's a sequence here, right? And in order to think about the value proposition, you first need to think about the use cases, and then you can distill the value from them. And so many people have mentioned use cases.
okay,
I think
that's
it's worth
great.
being explicit about that.
Alice, do you mind making some notes on that? That would be great, thank you. Yep, that's a really good point. And actually, we've probably got some we can share from Netherlands and elsewhere, yeah. Thank you. Anyone else got a comment on that one? Oh, so moving right along, have you established who, like a person or a group, who will take responsibility for coordinating or driving the national PID strategy development? So the tip there is to involve your key stakeholders in a coordination group. So remembering that this isn't necessarily in order, because there is a bit about identifying your stakeholders, and we can fiddle with the order if people are bothered by that. But someone needs to be responsible is the message there. Laurie?
So just, and I looked through the whole thing. One of the things when we were first starting up Orchid was this idea that you need more than one stakeholder group involved in any of these efforts to get any purchase. So it doesn't quite say that there, and I'm just wondering if that's something you might want to be more explicit about. You say, you know, who are the key stakeholders, but maybe go further and suggest that engage with more than one.
Yeah, yeah, you think that key stakeholders might be a bit exclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so just stakeholders or all stakeholders.
Or, you don't even all stakeholders, it's just to engage across stakeholder groups, something like that.
Yeah, okay, that is a very good comment. Anyone else? So we will go down to, have you identified your stakeholders and your approach to engaging them in the development of your strategy? Conduct a landscape and stakeholder analysis, consider diversity, openness and inclusivity. How will you involve all stakeholders who you want to be involved, and will you need funds to enable this? Because equity sometimes costs money. You know, you have to be able to fly people somewhere, or, you know, yeah, host a workshop that people can come to, or a series of them or something like that. So does that make sense, Laurie?
It makes sense, and I'm just going to be picky again. And I think to Chris's point, you know, there's some user-focused design here, and to make sure that when people see stakeholders, they are also thinking about the researchers that at the end of the day are benefiting from this, and make sure that you're doing something that includes researchers. So I don't know if you want to call that out specifically, or just, I don't know.
Well, look, it probably is worth calling out specifically, I would think, because we sometimes weirdly forget that, because all the infrastructure providers are like, we're doing it for you, researchers. We don't need you to talk to us. Yeah, sorry. Yes.
Is it possible to make a differentiation in stakeholders between the so-called publishers of you know, the prefix owners, so to say, the publishers of PID, and the users of a PID, because there may be different reasons for doing things.
Yeah, so we could add in there, you know, you might like to,
I mean, if you publish
categorize your
PID,
stakeholders.
take on a huge responsibility. You know, you publish it forever, basically, so you need to hold on to it forever, right?
Yes.
So it's which organization will take that responsibility for you.
Yeah, right. So
in the case of Orchid, for instance, then it's quite simple because the Orchid organization takes that responsibility.
Yep.
In the case of DataSite, for instance, if you know, we as a university, for instance, would in a system would publish a PID. DUI, and then we will be responsible for the content of that DUI and the consistency and all the likes.
Right. Yes.
So that is, you know.
Well, that's a good point. So maybe that's categorized as identify roles and responsibilities of stakeholders.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else got comments on that one?
But maybe what part of the stakeholders are decision makers, obviously, but that's a really important group. The you need some top level group that can make the decisions that this will be really implemented for some governmental systems that they can be in place. So maybe to specify this group somewhere that needs to be involved.
I think these are like very helpfully high level. I don't think specifying is going to be as effective, because then we just make a giant list. I think it has to be broad, and I think it also has to understand every context is different, and I think that's why you have a list of 10, right? And it's not like concurrent or stepwise, it's just like whatever makes sense in your context. So I would hesitate to deep dive. I get the sense lots of people in the room want to deep dive, and that's totally fair. I like that instinct in many contexts, but I think given the diversity of nations and challenges and strategies and stakeholders globally and nationally, we're just going to make a giant list if we go down that route. So I think researchers make sense because they're of course core to some of these things, but yeah, my thought is that let's wordsmith a bit, but I don't know that we need to dive into a list.
Yeah, well, I think that's actually, your point could go into the roles and responsibilities. I feel that because I think there is a point there around roles and responsibilities that could include both the researcher angle and the, who has the money effectively or the power to make this happen. True. Have you secured funds to help with the strategy? It's pretty obvious if you need that. Have you developed a vision for what the strategy will deliver and by when? So this is like, where are you going? So you might want to do a visioning exercise. So has anyone done that other than us? No. So some of these things may not be something that's applicable to you, but they're just to consider. So have you identified practical steps and a timeline to implement your strategy, often referred to as a roadmap? Or in Canada's case, a roadmap to a roadmap. Identify steps for what needs to happen, what infrastructure is required, who's going to do it, how it's going to be funded, when it needs to be done by, risks and dependencies. I mean, that's quite a long tip, and there's obviously more things included in a roadmap as well. But does that one make sense? Is there anything you would like to change about that? Nope. Then there's, have you established an open, consultative and inclusive process to develop the strategy and roadmap? Now, some people might not want that, actually, but there it is out there. Any comments on that one? No, then we go to, have you developed a communications plan? And this is probably something that we generally don't do. But it's kind of important, to put together some sort of way of communicating this strategy in a consistent way. If you do a plan properly, you have like a matrix and the stakeholder groups and how you're going to do this.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you want to add 2 other words, which is key messages and a communications plan.
Yeah.
You kind of have key messages at the top. So I don't know if you want to keep that here, but I feel like people who don't understand what a messaging plan, a communications plan is, having that would be helpful.
So if anyone has a communications template, we can put that in examples. So we have one at ARDC, and if we can share it, I'd put it in there because it does help with the thinking of these things. Any other comments on that one? No, then we go to, have you considered a benchmarking exercise? So obviously this is, if you're going to go somewhere with a vision, you need to know where you're starting from. And certainly in the case of Australia, we actually didn't do the benchmarking as part of the PID report because there's only so much bang you can get for your buck, and our focus was not that. So that exercise probably is something that needs to be done. Because otherwise, so actually a lot of the strategies the use cases that we got said, we want to manage impact, we want to measure impact, but literally no one had any plan for how to do that. Literally nobody. And you can't do it if you don't know where you're starting from. So think at the start about your benchmarking, because later down the track, your key stakeholders are going to say, I'm sorry, I put money in your strategy. What was the benefit for me? So just think about the benchmarking bit, I think. And there's one on, have you considered how you will measure the success of the strategy, which, maybe from the benchmarking or maybe other measures, like I don't know, we'll see what comes out of the strategies, but yeah. Anything on that one? No, then the 11th one is, have you engaged with the international community like RDA to get input into your strategy, share your program? You know, that's just stuff that everyone said they wanted to get out of the group, basically, is that. So is there anything else that we should add that comes to mind immediately from your experience developing these strategies?
I'm not sure where it fits at all, and it may have been in one of the earlier ones, but was there any discussion about sort of iterative approaches and drafting and redrafting? Because I think that's come up across all of our, that it's not just like we've done it, we've developed it, here's a timeline, and now we're done. It's just ongoing.
Right. Living document stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we had that one in. Anyone else want to add anything? Lena?
Well, maybe something around early engagement with the PID providers you're planning to use, because you can submit your membership application once your PID strategy is done, but maybe then you'll find that things are more entirely aligned. So I think at least sort of, having a conversation at an early stage is probably helpful.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. Yeah, perfect. Because actually, as we talked about yesterday, some of the business models for the national strategies might affect the PID providers, and some of the PID providers' business models will affect the PID strategies. So it's kind of really important to do. Yeah, okay, that's great. Anyone else want to add anything? I mean, this is a point in time capture, because as we develop these things, it will change. But yeah, if you think of anything afterwards, please just add it. Yeah, Tommy.
I missed a few in the beginning, but did you have anything in the beginning related to system boundaries?
System boundaries.
Like in the sense that what topically does this policy cover? Is it constrained to only science, and what would you consider scientific information that you're pitting?
Yeah.
In the sense that, and I can rave about this for 20 minutes, I think, but what is actually research data and what is just open data otherwise? That boundary is disappearing. So in the sense that you want to define in the beginning, what topic does this concern?
Coverage. Yeah, I think it's consider the scope. Yes, I mean, that's certainly very relevant to us in Australia, as I was saying, like where the government stuff stops and where it starts. I mean, for us at the start, we're not going to put a boundary on it. We're just going to see how it evolves, but it's definitely something to consider because it truly affects what the end product ends up being. So, yeah. And just to mention as well that this doesn't have to be used at the start. It can be used at any point during your PID strategy. So, okay, so thank you for that. So I think we're on to the last part, which is options for the working group. I don't know if we're able to bring the slides back up there. Just the last slide. Yeah, okay, so just in the few minutes that we have left, this working group's actually about to finish because it's been almost 18 months. It will be 18 months on 30 June that this group will have been around, and working groups have 18 months and then they produce the output. So that's what we're heading towards. So we have to deliver the draft output by the 30th of June with those work cases and use cases. So if you have a use case, please submit it to us by the 14th of April to give us enough time to be able to prepare that. So that's our deadline. If you really need more time, just contact us, but one of the co-chairs, but we really need to do that. I've lost my slides. Okay, so we have now options for this working group. So the first one is to fold the working group completely and just go, nope, we're done. But judging from that feedback, I'm going to say there's interest in continuing. There's an option there to sort of think about, perhaps bringing it under the auspices of the RDA PID egg. That's another option. Personally, and all of our 4 co-chairs have agreed that we would like to turn this into an interest group rather than a working group, and we're all happy to continue as co-chairs. But if anyone wants to volunteer, they're all welcome to do that. So we have representation there from Canada, Ireland, UK and Australia in the co-chairs. And then, we'd just like to continue. Can I just read that? Yeah, create a new interest group to continue discussions and work on a second iteration of the guidance document. That would be our preference. And the other option, is to create a new working group and go through this again and just produce a second guidance, but no one's really got appetite for that in the co-chair group. So what do people think? So just generally, do you think that's a good option? I'm just put to the general hands up. Should we continue as an interest group? So then we just provide a broad umbrella for discussion. So does anyone want to argue for one of the other options?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say is there already is the PID interest group, and so do you want to stand up a whole new interest group? I get that what you guys are doing is a substantial slice. But I think there is definitely room for a discussion with the PID co-chairs, myself included, to see if this would fit under that. So you don't have to set up a whole new interest group. There could be a set of activities related to this there. So I'm just throwing that out there. I don't think it's any better or worse than setting up the interest group, but it's, requires less overhead.
Okay, well, and to understand that better, how about we just have a discussion offline and see what the best option is. But the general consensus is we'd like to continue discussions. We'd like to do another iteration of some sort of guidance and sharing of use cases, because they're really important and helpful to see what other people are doing. So and everyone who's signed up for this group, we will email with the slides and everything from today, and we will email a link to the guidance document. It was actually in the slides, but just so you can review it and have your input, just remembering it's going to be a point in time thing, and then we'll keep a living document, just like our strategies. Oh, sorry, that was the one other thing. Should we call it National PID Strategies Interest Group or National PID Approaches Interest Group? Sorry, John's rolled his eyes.
No,
He's like,
it's
God.
It's a big question.
It is a big question. So how about we just get some input from that offline, I think. But strategies is kind of stuck now. So maybe we just stick with that. I see lots of nods. Sorry, I raised it. All right, so thank you for coming. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to raise? Thank you all for coming. I hope you got something out of this. See you at the rest of RDA meetings.
That wasn't like it was like and then and literally like 2 minutes all the time.